Good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving us your attention this morning. I've just got 5 points to touch on, then we'll have some more expansive explanations and then the opportunity for questions. One of the points to note about this Bishops' meeting was that it was the last one served by Canon Christopher Thomas, who for 10 years has been our General Secretary. And the decision we took was to appoint Bishop Nicholas Hudson here at my side as Episcopal Secretary and Mr. Greg Pope to be the General Secretary. So they will work in tandem and keep the work of the Bishops' Conference moving forward. Secondly, we have issued a statement on assisted dying, which you will have received together with an explanatory note from our press office. I would like, first of all, to thank all those who joined in our prayer yesterday evening. As bishops, we spent an hour before the Blessed Sacrament praying for the cause of the dignity of human life and its respect in this country. I know for myself, many groups joined us in that prayer, which therefore became a very significant expression of our faith. And I thank those who joined in. Secondly, this statement which you've received is issued jointly with the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. We don't often do that, but this time it's so important and such a shared concern that there was no difficulty in our working together. Thirdly, in a few moments, Bishop John Sherrington will highlight the main points of the statement and those we want to get across. But for my part, I just mention 2 things, please. Firstly, new legislation must always consider its impact on the wider good, on the wider population, and not simply on the particular cases that are brought forward. There are many wider implications in this proposed legislation. We've already heard that it might have an impact on the allocation of resources in the NHS, and that's really problematic. But we know it would also have an impact on many relationships within the family, relationships between doctors and their patients, and all the medical professions. And of course, it would have an impact, as we've heard, on the vulnerable. And secondly, I think right at the heart of this discussion should be a realization that every human being has a dignity which actually goes beyond personal autonomy. We're bound together in this gift of life, and we're not isolated atoms, as it were. Human dignity binds us together in a common good. So again, our basic point is please get in touch with your MPs, express your views, anxieties, and ask them to oppose or at least abstain from this coming vote on the 29th of November. Now, just to move more quickly, we also had a discussion about the impact of the recent synod in Rome on synodality into the life of this church here. And Bishop Nicholas will talk about that in a few moments. We also issued a statement which you have in gratitude and admiration, actually, for the encyclical letter of Pope Francis called Dilexit Nos. It's a reflection on the love of Christ for us, centered around that devotion to his Sacred Heart. And then finally, you will have received a statement on the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocide. It's the 91st anniversary of that, and there's a major event to take place on the 25th of November in Canterbury. If you want to know more about that, Bishop Kenneth Novakovsky of the Ukrainian Eparchy here will give you much more detail. So now let me go back and invite Bishop John Sherrington to speak in a bit more detail about the assisted dying statement. John.
Thank you very much, Father. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here this morning to speak about this most important issue. As you know, many bishops have written pastoral letters on this subject, and also, as the Cardinal said, that we have agreed this statement with the Bishops' Conference of Scotland is most significant, as we all recognise that this bill will cross a watershed in society if it's passed in permitting the assisting of the deaf. We open our statement with a focus on compassion. It's a word that's much used in all the debates, but compassion means to suffer with. That means to accompany, walk with a person who is sick, never give up on them or abandon them, to show through care that they are loved and valued. It's that love and care that recognises the human dignity of which the Cardinal spoke, which is innately given by God, the Creator. And it's that dignity that all of our actions wish to protect. We therefore advocate for consistently funded and strong availability of palliative care, because palliative care addresses the whole person. It can relieve physical pain, and it provides emotional and spiritual care to address all the dimensions of suffering in a person. But it is very randomly available and therefore needs much better funding, research, and the use of resources. As the Cardinal said, autonomy, again, a much used phrase in this debate, the autonomy of the individual, is not an absolute, but must be placed in the common good of society as a whole. And that's our focus, because legislation always changes culture, and hard cases do not make good laws. So we appeal to all people, those who are Christian, those of other faiths and none, to join us in defending the weakest and the most vulnerable in our society, who will be at risk as a result of this bill. There are serious issues of principle that we must consider. Firstly, as many MPs have said, the time between now and the 29th of November is woefully inadequate. There's not sufficient time to debate this bill with all its serious implications. It's been claimed that promises are made that the criteria on which this bill is based cannot be extended. And yet we know that no parliament can bind the legislation of another. We've seen in so many other countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada especially, and parts of the United States, how the criteria of people who are permitted assisted suicide widens and extends through the years. And that is our fear, that this will open a floodgate, as it were. The most vulnerable need to be protected, the elderly, the infirm, those with disability. And many people living with disability have spoken passionately about their opposition to this bill. Because the protection of the weakest is the foundation of the civilized society, and that is what good government is about. The Cardinal mentioned the damage that will happen between medical practitioners and their patients. We also need to think about those vulnerable care workers, those who work in our care homes, who often don't have the same safeguards and voice as many others in the medical profession. So we're concerned about the impact of this bill, the impact that it would have on them. And we say that the right to conscientious objection for all must be respected, and that is at risk as well in this bill. So now we're asking everyone again to write to MPs. MPs need to hear people's views, especially from those who are living with illness and those who have experienced the death of a loved one and know the good of palliative care. And also we affirm our actions to walk with others in their suffering, knowing that Christ is present with them as we face this situation. So thank you very much, and I'll be open to questions later.
Bishop John, thank you. And we'll just finish our presentation in a moment or two, and then, as Bishop John says, we're ready for discussion and questions. So I mentioned that we'd considered the implications of the recent synod on synodality for the life of the church in this country. Bishop Nicholas attended both of these synods, and he'll speak about how this contributes to our life here and now.
Thank you, Father. Good morning. We are awaiting the final translation of the English language final document, as it's called. We had a lot of talk during our plenary conference of the fruits of the synod, and I like to think of the final document as a gathering together, a reaping, a harvesting of the many fruits of the month's discussion that we spent in Rome. And we found ourselves focusing on three fruits in particular: the concept of charism, the concept of discernment, and the concept of formation. Charism, of course, is another word for gift, and it means the gifts with which each Christian person is uniquely endowed by virtue of their baptism. And we had a lot of conversation about how those gifts, those charisms, might be channeled in some cases into particular instituted ministries, these ministries of acolyte and catechist, which are coming into being, but also much more generally, how the people of God, all endowed with particular charisms, might be encouraged to harness those to the mission of the church, principally at the local level. But of course, this requires the second of those fruits, discernment. And there was a very strong sense in the synod that discernment must be shared between priests and people, particularly at the local level. And formation was a very significant feature of the synodal discussions, because all of this requires much more formation. We've been strong on formation in England and Wales since the Second Vatican Council, and a great number of the people of God have experienced formation of one sort or another. But for us to be more synodal in the way that the Holy Father is calling us to be, then we need to deepen and develop our formation as well. Formation was discussed about those particular instituted ministries, as we call them, but then also formation for parishes in discernment, how parishes discern how different charisms might be harnessed to the mission. And then also just the need for a deepening of our understanding of our Catholic faith. And as part of that discussion and how these fruits might be applied to the mission of the Church in England and Wales, we had a very encouraging presentation from Monsignor Armitage on behalf of the Guild of Our Lady of Ransom, a presentation on a national evangelization festival. Now, such a festival is designed to be repeated in different ways and developed over a series of 8 years between 2025 and then 2033, the Jubilee of our Redemption. And it reminds us that all of these synodal fruits are being gathered in order to help us grow in the mission of the Church in England and Wales. You remember that when the Holy Father announced this synod, he announced it under the three headings of communion, participation, and mission. And I like to think a way of expressing all of this is that we need to invest in all these different ways in ourselves as a Christian community in order to deepen the communion between ourselves, in order to call others into communion with Christ and with the Church, in order that many more people, both those who are new to the Church and those who've long been part of the Church, can participate much more deeply, much more fully in the life of the Church, and all contribute in much deeper and radical ways to the mission of the Church. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So that's our presentations, and now we're very ready for your responses, questions, points you'd like to make. Now, who's going to go first?
Sylvia Gussetti there. What do the bishops intend to do if the legislation on assisted suicide is approved?
Sylvia, thank you very much indeed for your question. We're not there yet, and we're not prepared to simply accept that this legislation will be approved. Clearly, the vote on the 29th of November is indicative, but it does not establish legislation. There's a long parliamentary process to go through. And that's the focus of our attention. We're not at all clear that this legislation will eventually find its way onto the statute book. We know there are issues. We'll come to those in due course.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Sylvia, it's a pleasure.
We actually do have a question in the chat, so I'll ask that of the panel. From Catherine. What did the Archbishop make of Esther Ranson saying she was deeply disappointed by his previous words on assisted dying and how he should not impose his faith on those who do not share it?
Well, the whole point of a democracy is that we share views. And I think we know that there are many voices of strong conviction in our society today, and all of them have a right to be heard. And that is absolutely true of the convictions that are based and drawn from faith and belief in God. To suggest that somehow belief in God is an excluder from public debate is actually abhorrent. Nobody should be excluded. And those whose views are formed in a tradition that has shaped our civilization for over 2,000 years are suddenly cancelled. Really, it's not acceptable. Joe Sidelka, any news on the Catholic parish in Gaza? I'm going to pass this to Bishop Nicholas, please.
Indeed. Thank you for the question, Joe. We hold the parish of Holy Family in Gaza so much in our hearts and prayers. I haven't heard for a few weeks from the parish, but we will be asking the Patriarch Cardinal Pizzaballa for any news from the parish when he comes to be with us in 2 weeks' time. And then we are moving towards a Holy Land coordination with 25 representatives of diverse countries going to the Holy Land to be in solidarity with the Christians in the Holy Land, and particularly with the ordinaries of the Holy Land. And as part of that programme, sadly, we won't be able to enter Gaza, but we are going to have a link up with Father Gabriele Romanelli for him to speak directly to us as the Holy Land coordination.
That's in January.
That's in January. The Cardinal's reminding me that's in January coming. Yes, thank you.
I believe that's the 18th to the 25th, isn't it, to coincide with Christian Union?
It is indeed. It is the 18th to the 25th of January. And as I'm being reminded, it does indeed coincide with Christian Unity Week. So we will be based in Jerusalem, and we will be having time with the Patriarch and with the ordinaries of the Holy Land and with the Nuncio and with Caritas Jerusalem. But we will also be going out several evenings to different Christian communities of different denominations to go and celebrate Christian Unity Week with them in that rather unique way.
There we go. Another one from Joe. Another question. Are you going to be advising medical staff? John.
Thank you very much, Joe. A number of medics will have already written to their MPs. They'll also be writing the professional bodies, such as the Catholic Medical Association that I've been in contact with, the Christian Medical Fellowship, and other bodies will be writing to MPs. They're beginning to, now that we have the law as published, which only happened this week, again in this very narrow timescale, it will be those experts in fields who will be examining the law and looking at the implications for their practice as Catholics and as Christians, and they will obviously be writing and later, if necessary, involved with the committee stage and putting forward their views. So in a way, there's a lot of dialogue going on with these medical, legal experts already. In terms of advising, we're always shaping conscience. What, in a sense, every Catholic bishop at the present time is doing is helping the formation of conscience on this issue. And so we know that they will be engaged, shaping their conscience, and many have already spoken about the potential risk and the dangers of this bill. So we know that they're already engaged and will continue to engage with them. Now, those two, just for those entering into more detail, of great concern in the published bill is the point that whilst a medical practitioner will be able to not take part he or she must refer to another medic. And many medics will not be prepared to do that. So there's a whole examination of referral here. And it's in fact stricter than the abortion law that simply says a medic may state his or her view and leave it at that. So that needs further examination. And the other point that really concerns me is about how we protect the ethos of our institutions, such as our Catholic hospices, St. Joseph's Hospice, St. Christopher's Hospice, and others, and it's number 23 for those who have expertise, to look there where it says that a doctor who is employed in an institution may or may not, whatever his or her view, the institution can't do anything detrimental to the view that that medic holds. So we have the potential risk of, within an institution that wants to protect its Catholic ethos and its opposition to assisted suicide, there could be somebody employed, though I don't know sufficiently the work of contracts, who has the view that he or she would raise this question with patients or be prepared to enter into it. So those involved in the ethos of institutions need to become very involved in this debate.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I think what was interesting in Leeds was that there was a really creative exchange and spirit among the bishops and those who work with them. As Bishop Nicholas said, there was an awareness of energy and enterprise among groups who put on big events like Flame and this proposed festival. And in that sense, we see a church which is broader in its energies and more, if you like, freeing up to express those things and to move and to go public. When we were talking about Flame, it was clear that a major impact of that for the thousands of youngsters who go there is that they're proud to be together with other Catholics on the public stage at the middle of Wembley, and they come out elated at the fact that there's strength and vigour in the life of the church. Now, if you just take a look at the Bishops' Conference, maybe we're not full of life and vigour, though we had 5 new bishops with us this week, younger men. So there's a profile of the church that doesn't always come across. It's a profile, I think, that is forward-looking, that has optimism within it, and certainly has a deep confidence in faith in Jesus as our way and our truth and our life. Now, before I switch into preaching mode, I think we probably should stop there unless anybody's come up with a last question before we go. Otherwise, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and please do all that you can to get across the urgency and the importance of the debate on this bill that permits suicide, assisted suicide, and which could have such, I think, a damaging effect on the fundamentals of how we live together as a society. Thank you all very much indeed.